join us now live from the Wanderers Stadium in Illovo, where that lecture will be taking place. Thulasizwe, it's incredible, this decision to ask Barack Obama, of all the world's leaders, to deliver what really is such an important Mandela Memorial Lecture, given that it is the centenary, 100 years.
Yeah, absolutely. What a big occasion it is for former U.S. President Barack Obama. This is the centenary year of the birth of Nelson Mandela, and a lot of expectation, a lot of programs that have been put in place, that have been scheduled to commemorate and celebrate the life of Nelson Mandela. But I was reading somewhere that actually the Nelson Mandela Foundation feels that Barack Obama is actually the perfect person to deliver this centenary lecture, in that, I mean, he is a leader that they see as having modeled his leadership on Nelson Mandela. In fact, Obama himself, when he spoke at the memorial service of the late former president, he did say that, you know, he was in university, in college, when he found out about Nelson Mandela, and he says he was so inspired, it set him on a cause that led to him taking an active part in politics and public life, which ultimately led to him occupying the highest office in the United States. So a lot of expectation and anticipation as to what exactly he will say this time around, along that theme of renewing the Mandela legacy as well as active citizenship. I'm joined by Simon Marks to sort of talk a bit about what we can expect. Simon, this is a sold-out event, as it were. I mean, they had to change venues, I think, 3 times until they settled on the Wanderers here to be able to, you know, seat 15,000 people. This is the 16th edition of this lecture. They've never seen anything like this in terms of the demand. Why do you think the lecture being delivered by Barack Obama has drawn such critical acclaim?
Well, because it's Barack Obama. I mean, fascinating hours lie ahead here at the Wanderers, because we have heard so little from Barack Obama since he left the White House and since Donald Trump moved in. Barack Obama was rooted in civic activism. He, of course, before he became president, before he became senator from the state of Illinois, he was a community organizer on those gritty streets of Chicago as a young law student and then lawyer. And so in many ways, he's absolutely the perfect person to come and make a speech about renewing Nelson Mandela's legacy and about renewing that sense of community activism and community spirit. But I think from an American perspective, as you know, I'm usually based over in Washington, D.C., covering all things Trump, and before that, all things Obama. From an American perspective, the reasons why it won't just be the eyes of South Africa that are on the speech that we're going to be hearing here in a few hours' time, but the eyes of the United States as well, is because the United States is at such a critical moment. The timing of this is extraordinary. We're less than 24 hours after that summit meeting in Helsinki between President Trump and Vladimir Putin of Russia, in which President Trump sided with Vladimir Putin over the viewpoint of his own American intelligence agencies that Russia was trying to influence the outcome of the American election 2016. When President Trump arrived back at the White House last night, reporters were screaming questions at him and screaming, how does it feel to be called a traitor to the American people? Because that was the analysis of so many foreign policy experts back in Washington. So people in the US, at least, will be looking to see what Barack Obama says, even if it's oblique, even if it's a glancing reference. Does he use this speech to send any kind of message about idealism in government, about morality in government, back to the United States at a time when that conversation is in absolutely common currency back at home?
And I was reading a quote attributed to his speechwriter, Benjamin Rhodes, who was saying President Obama sees this as such an important speech in that it actually will set the tone for his post-presidency. I guess we will be seeing what are the core causes that he will dedicate, the years after the White House to, and what are the issues that he'll be passionate about beyond the White House?
Yeah, and I think it's worth emphasizing to everybody here in South Africa, Thulas, this is not just another day for Barack Obama. This is certainly, I think, going to be the largest crowd he's addressed since he left the White House, and he doesn't speak publicly very much. And indeed, there are some Democrats back at home who fault him for that, who say, look, when you left the White House, even though you accept the concept that there's only one president at a time and you shouldn't weigh in and constantly nip at the heels of your successor, you did say that if fundamental American values were threatened by President Donald Trump, you would speak out. And he hasn't really done that volubly. There's the occasional tweet, the occasional statement when Donald Trump threatens to roll back some of Barack Obama's achievements, the Paris Climate Change Accord, pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, trying to roll back Obamacare, for example. But this is an opportunity for Barack Obama to set his stall, to lay things out for the post-presidency, certainly as far as his achievements in Africa are concerned. And as you know, Thulas, there are activists here in South Africa who have said the invitation to make this lecture should have been rescinded because they argue that Barack Obama's record on Africa was sparse, far fewer achievements, for example, they argue, than his predecessor in the White House, George W. Bush. And so there is politics at play here as much as Barack Obama wants to pay tribute to Nelson Mandela.
So interesting you should say that, Simon, because actually part of the narrative around this lecture from the Nelson Mandela Foundation at least is that they acknowledge that former President Obama's legacy, particularly on foreign policy, is sort of being contested, and some people have differing views about what he was able to achieve. And they draw contrasts and comparisons with Nelson Mandela's legacy in South Africa, and as far as that unity, building a united nation, but also not achieving some of the ideals in as far as economic transformation is concerned. And they're saying that they invited him precisely because of that, hoping that he will speak to that.
Well, I mean, and let's be clear, while the contrast between Barack Obama and Donald Trump shines a very burnishing light on Barack Obama, as frankly it does on George W. Bush as well, given the vagaries of the Trump presidency. Barack Obama is still a controversial figure in the United States. On the issue of immigration, for example, he was known as the deporter-in-chief. He deported millions of illegal immigrants from the United States long before Donald Trump began ripping babies out of the arms of their parents over the last few weeks. He prosecuted wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He came into the White House saying he wanted to end 2 wars. He was never actually able to achieve that. And here in Africa, his critics say he had a relatively spotty record of commitment despite his own personal family ties, which we saw on display just 24 hours ago when the former president visited Kenya. And yet, he is in the United States, and you will know better than I do, I suspect, here in South Africa. He has a moral authority now that he brings to any podium from which he makes a speech. And as I say, this, I think I'm right in saying, is going to be certainly the grandest stage on which he has spoken since that winter's day back in January of 2017, when he was watching Donald Trump speak about the American carnage that the Obama administration and its predecessors had brought to the United States.
Well, Simon, we'll be here. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to hear which direction Barack Obama takes his lecture. This is the 16th annual Nelson Mandela Lecture to be delivered by the 44th American President, Barack Obama. The number of people that are expected, the dignitaries, include the President of Botswana. They include Kofi Annan, who is also going to be here, Mary Robinson, certainly the who's who, many of them having delivered the Nelson Mandela annual lecture themselves, and this time around coming through to listen to Barack Obama speak. It's only a matter of a few hours now before that lecture is delivered. President Cyril Ramaphosa will also be here. As we know right now, he is receiving Barack Obama in a courtesy visit in Pretoria.